ICQ Podcast episode 267, Dummies Guide to DMR. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts and welcome to this, our 267th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by Philip Heckingbottom, VK6 Alpha Delta Foxtrot, and Stefan Alamata, 2E0 Victor Kilo Mike, and of course our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0MNG is joined by Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Bill, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray, to discuss latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a guide to DMR produced by Ed DD5 Lima Papa. Well, as always, we'd like to thank the donors that help keep our show advert free, and along with the monthly and annual subscription donors, we'd like to thank Stefan, 2E0 Victor Kilo Mike. He set up a subscription donation to us, which is greatly appreciated. He said he's enjoyed listening to the show for some time and would like to know if he could pop a link on his club's website. Of course you can, you're more than welcome to. And not only that as well, we can also forward as well to you, which we're doing this separate mail, obviously, the code where you can actually embed the ICQ podcast onto your club webpage. So if you want to find out how to do that, guys, drop us a line at info@icqpodcast.com and we'll let you know how to do that for you. So everything that can be done there to help promote the show is always greatly appreciated. Thanks for that, Stefan. Now, it's not only financially you can help the ICQ podcast out and, putting links on websites, etc. But, Phil, a long-time listener and a long-time also financial, donation to the, show, VK6 Alpha Delta Foxtrot, travelled all the way from Australia and met some of the London, based, members of the ICQ team and, passed on, stubbies and also biscuits for Mrs. B, which I'm sure she'll be getting one or two after some upcoming shows with her cup of tea. So, Philip, thank you very much. That was very kind of you. Certainly do appreciate that. And I know Mum was certainly very, very, very grateful to receive the biscuits you delivered to her, as I say there. So thank you very much. You can help us out by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send our way is always greatly appreciated. Well, now let's join Martin, Leslie, Edmund and Bill to discuss the latest amateur radio news, including what's killing amateur radio and an update on the Amateur Radio Parity Act in the States. I hope you enjoy.
Hi guys, and welcome to this episode's News Roundtable for episode 267. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Leslie Butterfield, who, the real Leslie Butterfield. If you listened to the podcast for the last 4 weeks, you'd have heard 4 weeks ago Bill doing an impersonation of Leslie. 2 weeks ago, you'd have heard Martin Rothwell doing an impersonation of Bill doing an impersonation of Leslie. But tonight, we have the real McCoy, Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Good evening, Martin. They let me out. I've been treated, so...
You have. It's good to have you back, mate. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, great to be back.
Yeah,
so,
and I know...
work pressures and all the rest of it, but we got to have a bit of fun and come up on the ICQ podcast as we do.
Yeah, I know. And I'm sure Bill's happy because I'm sure Bill was missing you, wasn't you, Bill? Mr. Bill Barnes N3JIX.
Yes, and you told Leslie not to step on you, and what do? Step on you.
Well,
someone has to do Leslie's job. Anyway, I had a dunk of a cake and some coffee, because I don't drink tea, in Leslie's honor, because we missed them so much, and good evening, everybody.
Yeah. Well, what you don't know is, and I can't repeat this, Leslie, and you can't say what you said, but we have had Leslie doing lots of scientific experiments. Seeing if Cadbury's cream eggs floating tea was one. But that was interesting that night, Leslie. Anyway, moving on, we also have with us Mr. Edmund Spicer, who's probably going to bring a bit of normality to the group tonight. Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Wouldn't bet on it, Martin. Good evening, and good evening, everybody.
Yeah, good to have you on, and you missed the last one due to work pressures, so... as I say, good to have you with us. Right, let's have a look at the first news stories. Podcast presenter Dan Romacek, KB6NU, put out an internet on the internet saying Is the internet or Millennials or FT8 killing ham radio? And there's lots of people have gone on about all sorts of bits and pieces. Bill, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Dan did a blog post on his blog where he talked about 4 different articles. K0NRs is the internet destroying amateur radio. N0SSCs are millennials killing ham radio. And then PE4BAS and NZ0T, both talking about FT8 based on, Joe Taylor's invention of FT8 and the other modes. Great article. I recommend everyone go out and read it. It's interesting, and there's a lot of interesting comments floating around in off of his article. But basically, the thing I took away from Dan, which I completely agree with, he comes to the conclusion as he's discussing these things is that he's not really sure if it is possible to get kids interested in amateur radio. And he does have a good suggestion, is encourage and support the kids or anyone else that experiences a sincere interest in amateur radio. I quoted that from his website, by the way, because he's absolutely right. I think this is where he's dead on. I think amateur radio is interesting enough as it is. So I think more of an exposure, encouragement, and support is probably a better thing to do than to just, get them licensed, get them licensed, get them licensed. That's, my take as I read this whole article. It was very interesting.
Yeah. But the thing is that if we'd have stayed the same, if we'd still be doing spark gap Morse as they were in, say, 1900, 1920, something like that, the hobby wouldn't have progressed and we wouldn't have all these interesting other things. So the hobby moves on. What do you think, Edmund?
Well, the short answer to his question would be none of the above. In my opinion, the 2 things that are killing amateur radio, if indeed anything is, are 1, inactivity, and 2, lack of new blood. And I use the word new deliberately, not necessarily young. That's the short answer. Do you want a longer answer, Martin?
Well, if you want to.
Okay, well, I'm not sure that I totally buy the concept that anything is killing amateur radio. I'm quite sure that if you turned the clock back far enough to the point when voice communication was becoming possible, you would have had many dyed-in-the-wool CW operators saying that voice was killing. Yeah, exactly. In the 1960s, doubtless people who enjoyed using AM, some of them would have said, I'm not using this newfangled SSB thing that these youngsters are using. Then in the 70s, probably repeaters were killing off the hobby because Class B licensees could then talk beyond the radio horizon, so that would discourage them from going for their Class A license, and that would spell the end of amateur radio as we know it, and so on and so forth. So I'm not entirely sure that amateur radio is being killed by anything. The internet is a distraction, and I've often thought to myself, it's a great pity that some of the people who are very active on amateur radio forums on the internet don't put down their keyboard and pick up their microphone. But there again, decades before the general public even knew what the internet was, there were other distractions in existence. So it's just one of many. So I don't buy it that the internet is killing amateur radio. As for millennials, well, I've heard different definitions of exactly what does constitute a millennial. I'm not entirely sure, but if we take it to mean a person who's younger than I am, then yes, I think Bill is right. It's perhaps more difficult to impress somebody of that age than it was, say, 30, 40 years ago, because these days, with the all-pervasive presence of the internet and technology and mobile phones, the magic of bouncing your signal off the ionosphere and being heard over the other side of the world doesn't seem so magical anymore. Possibly satellite communications, EME, talking to the International Space Station, things like that are still fascinating to people of all ages, even in this day and age with our modern technology. And last but not least, FT8, it's the latest thing. It won't be the latest thing forever. So something else no doubt will come along in a few years' time, which will in turn become the downfall of amateur radio operating. And even if you think that FT8, or any digital mode for that matter, is the spawn of the devil and should be made illegal, and I know there are some people out there who do think that.
Where have I heard that before?
Even if you think that, it still can work to your advantage for two reasons. Number one, it shows you when the band is open. And yes, there are beacons on some bands that show you that, but recently, these last couple of weeks, I've been tuning across 10 metres and 6 metres, and I've heard FT8 signals on those bands when no beacons have been audible at all. So the absence of hearing a beacon doesn't prove that the band is closed. It simply proves there isn't a path between your particular QTH and the beacon's QTH. So FT8, because it's so prevalent, will often show you that the band is open to somewhere. And secondly, if you're not using FT8, then because all the FT8 activity is sucking at the moment activity from other parts of the bands, it will make your non-FT8 signal stand out on people's pan adapters like a sore thumb. So you could well end up working somebody because you're the only SSB signal on the band, whereas if FT8 didn't exist, you would just be one of many SSB signals on the band and you wouldn't necessarily make the contact. So I don't buy it myself. Inactivity for me is the big one, but I do think that if we want the hobby to continue, we do need to encourage the youngsters, or anybody, as Bill said. I don't entirely agree with that bit that Dan wrote, that it isn't his job, or words to that effect, to attract young people in. If we want the hobby to continue and we want to have people around for us to have QSOs with, then that engenders a responsibility on us to bring people into the hobby. That's the long answer.
Yeah, well, that's a good answer. And, yeah, I agree with most of what you said. And in many ways, 2 weeks ago, I did a feature on Is the Internet Killing Hamfests? And based on the response on QRZ, there were lots of people arguing and saying all sorts of things, but I'm sure they hadn't even listened to the podcast, which rather worried me because they seem to be kicking up about all sorts of things. We threw the hand grenade in the room, Leslie. What do you think?
Oh, this reminds me of a famous character on Dad's Army that sort of goes around saying, "We're doomed, we're doomed." Look, I agree with you guys. I used to go into visit clubs, as you know, many years ago, but you go to some clubs and they're absolutely buzzing with activity. They're getting stuck in, encouraging people, doing projects, doing this, that, and the other, and you can see it and you can feel it in the atmosphere when that occurs, and that's great. Other clubs, you go, now it's not the modes that are killing. I'll use that word, killing the hobby. It's when you get that atmosphere of nothing occurring, nothing's working. And really that's down to the clubs and us as individuals to encourage people. Great, because I don't want to keep setting up the gear all the time. If somebody else can do it and learn how to do it, then I'll pass on the knowledge on. That's great. That's the way I look at it. But to say it's killing the hobby, no, I don't accept that at all. They change modes and then it goes to something else in another few months' time. That's perfectly fine in my book. No problem at all.
Yeah. Well, I think in general we agree with Dan that, in fact, it's not killing off and things are changing. Yeah, life changes all the time. So that was a good one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moving on. The next news story, and I kind of put this one in more because I got caught out talking to a special event station the other day. But Norway are reducing 2x1 contest call signs, introducing 2x1 call signs. And, obviously they'll be for contests, as I would suggest. But Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
No, I'd like to know more about it, to be honest. It's a new one on me.
We've got special call signs in the UK, and in the States they use I think it's 1x1s for special event stations. If I remember right, Bill, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so
I mean, we've got GB call signs over here for things like that, don't we?
We do have, but then for special event stations, and they start GB, and GB3s are analog repeaters, GB7s are digital repeaters, and then GB anything else is probably a special event station. But there are contest stations around with very short call signs because the RSGB petitioned Ofcom to get these a couple of years ago. So
are they GB9s? I heard somebody mention about those.
Not a GB. Well, I haven't heard of GB9, but I have worked a G9.
Yes, there is, and this is a very recent innovation. At the moment, during the month of May, GB9 RAF is on the air for the 100th anniversary of the RAF, the actual anniversary itself was the 1st of April 2018. But traditionally, G9 was not an amateur radio call sign. It was an experimental transmission call sign. I think, was it Belling and Lee radiated a test card on Band 3 VHF in the very early days of 405 line television? G9 Alpha Echo Delta. But in any case, it wasn't an amateur radio call sign. But now, and this is a very recent thing, GB9 and GR9 for the Royal Wedding Weekend has been licensed, yes. And you can get short contest call signs like Mike 9 Alpha, for example.
Yeah. I should have remembered GB9 RAF because I actually worked them on the Belfast on Saturday. They were in Northern Ireland, if I remember right. But
Yep, Grade Point Fort Amateur Radio Club. The operator is a guy called Thomas, and if you work him, send him an email as per his QRZ.com details, and he will send you a very nice commemorative certificate by email.
There you go.
Oh, wonderful.
There you go. So Bill, you have sort of various call signs in the States. I know when I got my extra, I went straight to extra. I had a 2x2, but you can have shorter call signs as well, can't you?
Yeah, the trick is right now the vast majority of the 2x1 call signs are being used, and then as people pass, there's like a 2-year bake-off period where you can't request it on the Vandy system in case a relative wants it, or if the person leaves. I think there's a thing they can leave it to like a club if they want to use a club call sign. And there's a couple websites that monitor this because I never really gave it much thought because I won the lottery on call signs when I got mine randomly assigned to me. But I mean, just think about the Norway thing for a second, okay? CQ contest, Lima Charlie 9 Norway, Lima Charlie 9 Norway calling contest. That is awesome. Sorry.
No, be good. That'll be good. I think
so that's going to be really neat.
Yeah, but I think some of these interesting call signs just make it that bit more interesting when you're on the band. That's one of the reasons why I never went for I could have maybe gone for an M0, but there are a lot of M0s around. I have M1, and I'm quite happy with my M1. Makes me a little bit more unique. But, as I say, some of these other call signs are really, really good when you hear them. So, I think it's a good one. All these contest call signs and special call signs are certainly worth having, in my opinion. Yeah?
Creates a bit of activity.
Certainly does. Bill?
Only slight draw... Oh, sorry.
Go on.
Only slight drawback is that if band conditions are marginal, if you start introducing call signs that are shorter than people are used to, or contain numbers that traditionally aren't used, for example, 9 in the context of the UK, is it going to end up being self-defeating because people will keep coming back to you asking for your call sign in the mistaken belief that they've copied it incorrectly or only partially?
Everybody uses DX spotting clusters anyway, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
How about that for ruining the internet, ruining amateur radio?
Well, I'm not a contester, so I wouldn't know. I mean, again, speaking from ignorance here, possibly, on HF contests, as I understand it, the exchanges are always 5 and 9, even if clearly they're not in the real world. So if you want to speed things up, I would have thought it would have just been easier to dispense with exchanging signal reports, which we know are always going to be 5 and 9, rather than reducing the length of the call signs.
5 and 9.
Straightforward.
I actually have gotten contest exchanges that were not 5 and 9.
On HF rather than VHF.
Yeah, rarely. But
really?
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. They're messing with people, and I'm running QRP, and so it's like I know they say I'm a 5.5. It's like, yep, I just type in the logging program 5.5 tab enter, next contact.
If you gave genuine signal reports in an HF contest, you would make yourself extremely unpopular, wouldn't you?
Yes, but I'm just telling you, I've heard it multiple times, so it's okay.
Yeah, I like
contesting.
Yeah,
I think the usual thing is
hear it once in a while.
I like the 5.9. What's your call sign?
Yeah, please repeat your call sign. Please repeat your QGH.
Yeah,
but you're 5 and 9.
You on about strange call signs? The Sutton and Sheen Club has a G2 call sign, which is quite rare. We have G2 XP, hence XP being used on the repeater in South London because it's run by the Sutton and Sheen Club. But if we were operating in the strictest thing of using it as a club call sign, we become GX2 XP, and that really throws people's minds. It really does people's heads in when you go GX2 XP and go, I can't handle that. So, but it's an interesting one, and it does keep the hobby live, I think. So that's a good one. Right, moving on. Bill, you're going to have to lead with this one because the Amateur Radio Parity Act is in the NDA Act. Well, it's been put in there. So can you elaborate a bit more on this one? At least they're doing something, I think.
Yeah. National Defense Authorization Act is an annual U.S. ritual where they, give money to the military to do things. They inserted the language directly from the Amateur Radio Parity Act, which has, passed the House here, I think twice, maybe 3 times, and it's been stalled in committee in the Senate. So they snuck it into the Armed Services bill with the NDA. I actually had to search and find it. It was really hard to find. It starts on page 522. And it's under section 1083, Amateur Radio Parity. They basically cut and pasted the text from the Amateur Radio Parity Act and just stuck it in there. So this one probably is going to slide through. Now, this is not without controversy here. Some folks feel the language is not good. Some folks feel the language is actually worse than the status quo. I don't have a legal background to judge the language so much, so I'm not really sure if it's good or bad. I just found it interesting, not interesting good or interesting bad, just interesting that they slid it into the National Defense Authorization Act. So I'm thinking this one's going to actually slide through here. That's my take on it.
We call that gerrymandering here.
Oof. Yeah. I started to read the thing because I had the PDF here on my machine, and I was looking it over trying to find this thing. And legislation in America is very interesting to read, just in general. It's very confusing, very much legalese, and they're talking about obscene amounts of money they're spending on the things of war. It just blows my mind. But this is in there, so it's probably gonna go through.
So that's a good thing for us amateurs if it's in there and it goes through as part of something else, because it becomes law, and we kind of get what we want, don't we, Bill?
Well, we'll see. It instructs the FCCs to set up rules for dealing with homeowners associations. So this doesn't change anything with CC&Rs, which is deed restrictions. I have one. It's just I couldn't find a house built after 1980 that didn't have these, deed restrictions stuck in them. It's not as good as the municipal exemption the FCC did with PRB1. That is very handy, very useful. Keeps the town from saying you're not allowed to put antennas up. But this just, it kind of says you have to talk with your homeowners association and negotiate your antenna installation based on aesthetics. Depending on your homeowners association, which I don't have one, but some folks do, and that may be an unpleasant experience for some people. And for other people, I know the homeowners associations have probably already let them put antennas up, because it's very varied how these various homeowners associations conduct their businesses. I always equate a homeowners association as to like a forced club. You live in a community, you have to deal with water runoff. So they, form a club basically that everyone has to join, have to put money in, and they, take care of the water runoff issues with the various state and federal agencies and stuff. And then some of them go way past that. They have community mowing. They clean the snow off the roads. Well, every time you do stuff like that, costs rise. So I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work out yet. I am optimistic, I will say at this point, that this is going to get passed, and I'm not sure how the effect is going to be, but we will know in a few years is my guess. Because I'm sure people will give us feedback if it's not working well.
Yeah. That's giving us a good insight, Bill. Leslie, you got any comments on this one?
No, I just found it very, very interesting what Bill was saying. Especially things like your community community groups. We get very, very similar here, and they differ. So I did find it very, very interesting what he was saying. I think there's attempts over here to try and get similar things done, but that's another issue for another day. But I don't think it's going to happen here. We've got too many ancient laws and preservation things, and it becomes all very complicated.
Yeah. Well, I've got away with my antennas because there's an HF vertical at the bottom of my garden that's never had HF up it, and it's been there for the last 15 years. So it was faulty when I bought it. I bought it for pennies, and it's put there just as a holding exercise of I've got one, and nobody can complain about it because it's past the planning permission time that you'd have to take it down. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I live in the wrong country to be able to comment on this story.
All right.
Okay.
No, I can't think of anything sensible to say, so I'll be quiet on this one.
No, there's no problems. No.
For which I'm sure the ICQ podcast audience is very thankful.
No, we all enjoy it, and sometimes we have things to say. The one that the next news story, then, Eben, if you're going to duck out of this one, the next news story that really got me, and I thought this was really silly. It said Beacon Spot change of domain name. So there used to be a beaconspot.eu, but because of the UK's leaving the EU, they've decided we can't have Beaconspot EU. So Beaconspot have had to move themselves to beaconspot.uk, and they'll have a redirector on for a few months. I mean, that's stupid. I mean, in fairness, the ICQ podcast has got a .com, which originally was a US, extension. But this is stupid as far as I'm concerned. What do you think, Edmund?
That would have been a novel twist, wouldn't it, if the EU had voted on blocks to leave us? Which is what you nearly said, wasn't it?
He did.
Yeah.
No, we've had enough of them.
Yeah, maybe it's a conspiracy. I'm not highly computer literate, so I don't really understand what practical difference it makes to anything. And indeed, the .eu bit at the end, I can't think of any other websites that I've used or visited that end in .eu. I'm talking about in life in general, not just specifically amateur radio related. As long as it still works, then really I'm not overly worried what the bit after the dot is at the end of the web address, and I don't know enough about it really. I mean, does this change fundamentally affect anything or cause us problems accessing it or anything?
Well, the only way it would really cause you problems is if you've got it locked into a favourites or something, or a shortcut. When you click on the shortcut, it wouldn't work. So you probably have to. The problem is that if a web address disappears, you think that the company or the function which is happening has totally disappeared. You don't expect it to change its web address. That's the thing. If you do a search on one of the search engines, you should find the new website, but that's assuming you don't think it's gone out of business. That's the problem, Edmund, in my opinion. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Leslie,
well, I probably would do that. I would do a search to see if it was still around, but I think they're keeping the beaconspot.eu web page on air, for want of a better description, with a message on it telling people to update their bookmarks, aren't they? So
yeah, but that'll be there for a few months and then they'll lose it, I think. So interesting one. Leslie, you any comments on this one?
No, it's all part and parcel of what's happening at the moment, and there's going to obviously be a transition period, and this is just another one of those things that's going to happen. Nothing to get worried about. The internet's a worldwide thing, and if it can't go through one way, it goes through another way. So, yeah, there's probably a little bit of aggravation short term, but long term, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I just think it's silly, and don't worry, Bill. Colin isn't going to ask you to host because we got a .com. He isn't going to ask you to host our website. Hi. But what do you think?
I do have Crazy Bill's discount web hosting. Our prices are insane.
Is that a bit like GoDaddy?
It's more like Bill has a 1-in-1 account.
All right. Okay.
Anyway, it is kind of silly. I mean, it's almost, like, oh, you're leaving us, so we're gonna do all these little jab things. But the comical part is Beacon Spot could have got a .us domain name if they wanted it.
That's what I'm saying. You can do it another way.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So it's all good.
I think this is just all silliness because we are leaving the EU in the UK, and the whole thing is that I think it's a bit petty in some ways. I mean, there were lots of different extensions came out, like .eu, there's .tv, there's .radio, there's all sorts of extra extensions that they've tried. Well, the internet has tried to sell to make a bit of money, and I think it's silly. Just leave it alone. But there we go. And I just thought it was silly, though. Right, moving on. Unfortunately, none of us went to Dayton. Well, Bill didn't go Dayton, did you, Bill?
No, but Dan did.
Dan did, yeah. I suddenly realised Dan was there teaching. So, there were some new rigs released in Dayton. We haven't had our grubby hands on them, so... seen some nice pictures, and Yaesu have released a software-defined radio. Looks quite interesting. Kenwood have released a very pretty radio. I assume it's the replacement for the TS2000, because that's been out so long. It must have been in production nearly 20 years. So, Bill, do you want to go first again?
Sure. I mean, it's very early on this stuff. It's, some companies want to, show stuff at the Dayton, some want to show at the Tokyo radio fair, and some want to show it at, I can't even pronounce it, the place you go to in Germany here in a couple weeks. You want to help me on this one, Martin?
Yeah, it's Friedrichshafen, or as Colin refers to it as Fredshedhaven, but it's Friedrichshafen.
The problem is Colin gave me that pronunciation, and that's what sticks in my head, and I know it's wrong.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, sorry. Anyway, the details on the Kenwood were kind of vague online. The details on the new Yaesu, very interesting. So I'm going to carefully watch this as it goes along here, and people start getting their hands hopefully in a few months, and we see how things go.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how the new Yaesu is actually an SDR. Edmund, what do you think?
Well, I suppose the price is the crunch, isn't it? Am I right in thinking that there's no official word on how much these radios will cost us yet?
I would suggest the Yaesu will be in the £3,000 mark. I would guess. Ooh. I don't know. Okay. I would suggest it's a mid-range radio. It will probably compete with the ICOM 7610, the new one that ICOM have brought out. It's in that sort of range. My suggestion is. So, if they get the pricing right, it'll be very interesting.
Well, it's kind of over my head and over my pocket as well. And given that all my HF antennas are bits of wire, the high spec of those radios would be a bit lost in my QTH, even though I'm in a semi-rural location. On occasions, I do have quite a high noise floor level as well. So I'm not in the market for a new rig, and even if I were, because they're brand new models, I think I might wait a bit for the inevitable early teething problems and the first few firmware upgrades to get ironed out. But if it was me, I'd probably go for an FT991A with the scope feature on it, rather than the more expensive Yaesu that's coming out. But I'm sure somebody somewhere will love it.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, we can't talk too much about it because we obviously haven't had our grubby hands on one. Hopefully, the guys going to Friedrichshafen, Chris and Colin and Ed, will get up close and personal with some of these and have a good look. And I mean, I'm at a stage like yourself where I don't go for big, expensive HF radios. I'm quite happy with the ones I do, and I don't do serious operating. However, I think software defined, it seems to be the way things are going, and probably in 20 years' time they're all going to be software defined, which is the worrying thing in my books. What do you think, Bill?
There's some advantages to SDR, and there's some disadvantages. I think right now at this point, I think it looks like SDR gives you a lot of advantages based on the processing and the different things you can do with your analog to digital converters now. I think the classic, super het receivers, even though some people are, oh my God, these things are awful. I think they have a place. I'm just very interested in general with the SDR. I use a KX3 from Elecraft. It's an SDR under the hood, but it's a hybrid kind of. And Edmund was saying about antennas and stuff. I can notice a difference between my 706 and the KX3 on receive with the same wire antenna. It's definitely, for weak signal work, I definitely can hear the stations clearer. I'll go into the filtering thing that I did recently when we talk a little bit, but cranking the filters in a little bit makes it even more better. And it's just one of those things that a station I could not decipher or discern what they were saying, I can copy the station. So I think it's a good way to go at this point.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting technology. Leslie, software defined. Have you played with software defined radios at all, or had your grubbies in, or are you still at the super het level?
I did, but as far as the amateur radio side, I've still got the old super. Well, I've still got an Icom 725. That's my main rig here. I did play with SDR, but that was many, many years ago. That was part of my job I did at the time. Do I think it's the ways of going amateur radio? Yes, absolutely. Things you can do with it are much, much better, as he's quite rightly pointed out. Yeah, like I said, the way forward is definitely SDR. The only thing is with this is my credit card is zero. And you may laugh at this. I'd like to keep it at zero. I'm not going to sort of go out and buy the latest rig just because of the sake of it. Should my kit need replacing, that's the point to start doing it, I think. But yeah, it's very much a case of just sort of wait and see where these radios are going. That's my take on it.
I think you're right. If you're in the market for a new rig, if you really are in the market for a new rig, I think it's a good time to be there. Would I rush out and buy a new rig today? No. Yeah, I looked at both these rigs and they are very pretty, and I think, well, yes, I quite lusted after them, but do I need them? Not at this point in time. However, those of you who listen regularly would know that I've been playing with a software-defined receiver, the SDR Play, and I'm almost at the stage of getting rid of my general coverage shortwave receiver, because the SDR Play does everything I want. So I think in 20 years' time, there will only be SDRs around, and the whole hobby will have moved on. Once again, that's what makes it interesting, I suggest.
Absolutely.
Right, well, that pretty much kills off the news stories for us, and a few interesting ones there, and some interesting discussions. Now let's find out what you guys have been up to since the last time you were here. Go on, Leslie, you can go first on this one.
Oh, well, what happened was my landlord rightly decided to decorate, make sure the flat was all decorated up. So I had to temporarily disconnect and pack all the radio gear. That was a nightmare. And then when that was done, I moved back in again. And then I had to repeat the process back. So that is one of the reasons why I couldn't make the last ones. But I've been very, very busy on that. It's still not there yet. Bits are still in boxes. But we're going to get there. I know we will. And what else? Oh, yes, the perennial F4002 handhelds. For some reason, I don't know why, but they seem to be breeding. And there's a few more of them that have ended up in my bottom cupboard. So I don't quite know what's happening there. So that's what's occurring. That's what's been occurring, mine.
Yeah, so you're into the PMR now, which is no problems. It's good, and I know what you were telling me earlier, and I wish you every success on that, Leslie. I think it's an interesting way of doing. Bill, yourself, what have you been up to radio-wise since you were here about a month ago?
Just a few things. I configured my SOTA laptop to work with gpredict, a program called GQRX, and the RTL SDR I had this fantasy, and I say fantasy now, that I could, do an FM sat pass, and instead of using a VHF radio to receive, I could do it with the SDR. It would automatically, switch frequencies due to Doppler shift, save the disk, so I have a WAV file to listen to make sure I got the call signs right. That didn't go well. I've been messing with this. Possibly I need a bandpass filter to knock out the noise, because the noise floor was way higher with that than the HT, or just the simple fact that the RTL SDR I have is in a plastic case. Maybe this thing needs to be in a little metal box or something. I don't know. But so I was trying that two or 3 days over the last couple of weeks, trying to hit the satellite passes and stuff, and that didn't go well. So I'm still working on that. And that's the other thing that I found out. One of the tests I did was I actually just took an HT and set it for the downlink frequency of a satellite at the house and turned the power all the way down and just talked in the HT. And for whatever reason, the audio coming out of the RTL SDR at the house was like half a second delayed. Well, I listened to my voice as I do the uplink to make sure I'm getting through okay, and that half a second will probably drive me crazy. So I'm not sure if this is going to work at all. Another thing I did was I put a narrow filter into my KX3. This is the only part that I didn't buy when I bought the kit. I said, I'll get that later if I need it. Well, I finally got to the part where I'm like, okay, I need the narrow filter for PSK31. The funny story about it is I actually used it for an FT8 QSO. So, the thing's copying, 3 kilohertz worth of stuff. If the person's in the middle somewhere, or if you move your, turn the dial on the radio a little bit to move the center of the waterfall, I cranked it right down to 100 hertz or something like that to notch out a really strong, probably nearby FT8 signal to work a Canadian station. So that was kind of neat. And then the last thing I was working on is last month I talked about the antenna analyzer project. I finally put that thing together. The DDS module showed up from China and it doesn't work right. So now I'm starting the troubleshoot process. So when no antenna on it, plots, various SWRs across the band, no problem. Plug an antenna in, it comes up 999 to 1 SWR. So I did my normal, flip the thing over, reheat all the solder joints, make sure they're good. And now I'm starting the tracing process to trace the signal around the thing. And I work on it for a few minutes and I walk away for a day or two because that stuff gets frustrating.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing you'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, Bill, and think, oh, that's what it is. I've done that many a time. But hopefully you'll get that working. And you mentioned satellites. Yes, I still haven't done my satellite contact, but I'm getting closer. I'm really getting closer. Chris is not going to be around much for the next few weeks, so I'm going to probably start and do the initial recce and try. But we will get that one done. Edmund, what are you up to?
Well, we've reached that time of the year where sporadic E kicks off, particularly on the 10 metre and 6 metre bands, but that could be to do with me not being in the right place at the right time, because they can be rather fleeting and very localised, can't they, sporadic E openings? So I haven't caught many of them, but the ones that I have tended to be quite long lasting and with very strong signals. So that's possibly a good sign. So I would encourage anybody out there who's never sent their signals long distances using sporadic E to have a go at it. And you don't need particularly good antennas or high power. And just as an example, on 6 metres, beginning of May, I worked a station in Alicante in Spain, Echo Alpha 5 India Sierra Zulu, that's Trev. Both of us were using 3-element Yagis. In my case, it's one that's fallen on the floor quite a lot and has got really wonky elements and is being held together with sellotape and cable ties. His one at the other end is probably a bit better. He was running 500 watts, beaming it in my direction. I was running 5 watts from the Yaesu 817ND, beaming it in his direction. He was 5 and 9 plus a smidge to me. I was 5 and 7 to him. So power, whatever anybody might tell you to the contrary, power is not the be-all and end-all in having a QSO. But we knew that anyway, didn't we, Martin?
We certainly did, Edmund. Certainly did.
And can I also just say hello to Chris M0TCH, who I worked on 2 meters FM from home in, I think it was April. There wasn't a huge lift or anything on. He was just mobile locally. And he heard me calling and he very kindly gave me a call. So you're in the log, Chris. That's nice for you. And in 2018, my local radio club, the Worthing District Amateur Radio Club, is celebrating its 70th birthday. And to celebrate that, since Easter until the end of this year, I have the permission to use one of the club call signs, Golf X-Ray 1 Whiskey Oscar Romeo, which is an old Class B call sign, although these days it's a full call sign. So I'm using that quite a bit, primarily on VHF, as befitting of its heritage, but during the summer and at weekends, particularly when there are special event stations on the air, I have been breaking with tradition and convention and going on HF with this as well, particularly on 80 metres. 80 metres has been quite good, better for inter-G contacts than 40 metres has been this past few weeks. So if you are QRV on 80 or 40, or locally to West Sussex on 2 metres, or 6 metres or 4 metres, listen out for GX1WOR and I'll be pleased to work you. Or stick that call sign with a hashtag into Twitter and you can see some photographs of what I've been up to. And that's it.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good, mate. Well, as I say, it's it was good because Chris mentioned he worked you as well. He was down that part of the world. And when I go down to see Colin's brother, I really ought to work here because I was down there last Saturday. I apologise because I'm only, a couple of miles from you. So I should be able to work here from there.
Well, there are 67 entries in the logbook, but the high-tech paper log has got plenty of pages in it, so there's room for you, Martin.
Okay.
And there's also information and details on qrz.com as well.
Okay, well, I'll try and get down. Bill, you've got a hard stop, so we're going to say 73 is due, and then I'll mention what I've been up to. So, Bill, best wishes, and go pick the children up.
Oh, yes. Thank you. 73s.
73s, Bill. Thanks
Cheerio,
for tonight.
Cheerio.
So, yeah, well, as I say, Bill's on a hard stop tonight. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I've got a lot compared with normal. Yes, on Sunday I worked GR9RW, which was a special event station on 2 metres for the royal wedding. And GDR donated the royal wedding designation, and 9 always used to throw me, as Edmund said, it was an experimental license, but G9RW is the Cray Valley Club, so they're not a pirate if anybody hears them. Saturday morning I was on HMS Belfast, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And yes, I forgot I worked GB9REF, so from the Belfast, so that was good. Prior to that, I'm working backwards. I must have my brain in neutral. Prior to that, Thursday night, I got re-elected as the chairman for Sutton and Cheam Amateur Radio Society. I think it's about 3rd year now, so I'm still chairman. And we had a nice visitor, Phil Higginbottom, VK6ADF, turned up to meet us, and he met Martin, Chris and myself, and came along, and I said, well, you realise that you're meeting us at an AGM, it's not going to be that interesting, but he enjoyed himself, and the club, I'm sure, made him very, very welcome. In fact, I know they did, because a lot of people were chatting to Phil throughout the night, so that was good. And Phil joined us on HMS Belfast on the Saturday, so he came along, did some operating, and just generally had a good time. So, Phil, thanks for turning up. Thanks for meeting us, and we appreciate the chat. Phil's call sign is VK6ADF, so good one there. Most mornings I've been nattering on C4 FM to Martin Rothwell, so we do have a quick chat in the mornings between about 7 and about 7:20. So if GB3XP is linked to any of the groups, then you'll hear us there. And one last thing is, I took the opportunity of fitting a TXCO into my FT817, and I had a look on the internet, and for the price they were from China, they were silly money. Buying from a UK dealer about 75 quid. Buying from China, it was about £7. So I thought it was worth a try. So I've fitted a TXCO in my 817, and we'll see how well that performs over the next few months. So that's what I've been up to, guys. And let's say, I think we've all done quite a bit. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for joining me tonight. Bill's just left, Bill Barnes N3JIX. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
Yes, thanks, Martin. It's been a blast. You know what it's like, pressure works and that, and that's always going to happen. But I'm glad to be back for this one.
I'm glad we had you back, mate. Yeah, it's always fun. And I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Many thanks for having me on, Martin. And yes, like Leslie there, I'm quite pleased that my employer didn't make me work this evening as well.
Yeah. Well, it would have been a shame because we did miss you last time. Okay then, well, I'd like to say 73s to everybody, and we'll do it again. 73.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY, and we start off with news for you contesters out there. The 2018 IARU HF World Championship contest will take place from 1200 UTC on Saturday the 14th of July to 1200 UTC on Sunday the 15th of July. Both single and multi-operated stations might operate for the entire 24-hour period, and all licensed amateurs worldwide are eligible to participate in the contest. The objective of the contest is to make as many contacts with other amateurs as possible, especially IARU member society headquarters around the world, using 160, 80, 40, 20, 15 and 10 metre bands. So we'll put more information about this on the ICQ podcast website, and certainly for our contesters, hope you enjoy taking part in this year's event. News of two new beacons coming on the air in Europe, both one being a 4 metre beacon and the other one being a 6 metre beacon. TF1 VHF is a 4 metre beacon, and 6 metre beacon alongside it. They're going to be located about 80 kilometres northwest of Reykjavik in the town of Alftanes. So certainly one there to listen out for, as say if you're looking to work through Iceland at all in any period of time there. And to finish up our news in brief section here, the IRTS in Ireland have released new band plans for 8 and 5 metre amateur radio bands as well, covering 30 to 49 megahertz and 54 to 69.9 megahertz allocations. So again, link on the ICQpodcast.com website of the download band plans for you to check out. Well, now we head across our features episode, which is a feature of DMR for Dummies made by Ed Durant, DD5 Lima Papa. I hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
The Dummies Introduction to Basic DMR. Why I called this piece The Dummies Introduction to Basic DMR is because I felt like a real dummy when I tried to program my new Baofeng RD5R DMR HT. The background is that my existing FM HT is getting old, and the battery will no longer charge. The option was to buy a combined FM and digital dual-band HT, as it doesn't cost a lot more than a reasonable Chinese FM-only HT. In fact, the DMR HT cost me the same as I paid for my Chinese FM HT 7 years ago. Searching around, I found the Baofeng RD5R at €90, shipped from a Berlin warehouse of a Chinese company. This is definitely the cheapest dual-band, dual-time slot HT on the market today. So I decided to buy the HT. Okay, but what exactly is DMR, and what's this dual time slot thing? Here's what I found out from the internet and through trial and error. I could still be wrong on a couple of points. Stepping back a little, digital mobile radio, or DMR, is a system to transmit audio as a digital stream to other transceivers, or more usually to and from repeaters. The general term used is digital voice, or DV. And DMR is not the first DV mode that amateurs have used. There's APCO P25, that is used in conjunction with emergency services, and of course the well-known D-Star and Fusion. These last two modes are only used by amateurs, and that's a big difference. while using what is a 2006 European ETSI standard, DMR was never designed for use by amateurs, as D-Star and Fusion were. Equipment for DMR is cheaper because of the numbers of units created for commercial use, but it is also complex to program and has many features that, while needed in commercial installations, can cause confusion in the amateur world. That is not to say that configuring D-Star or Fusion rigs has always been easy, but with DMR, in the commercial world, the programming of the HTs is done by specialists, never by the users. So the challenge is greater for an amateur to configure a DMR rig than, say, a D-Star one. I've been burnt before with a D-Star purchase that never worked, but at least the DMR HT is a third of the cost and would work as a standard FM HT if I couldn't manage to get the DMR side working. The problems start with the new terminology, goes on through into relationships within the configuration that aren't always documented, and finishes up with a lot of manual typing that can bring with it errors that are hard to find. So why even bother? What's so special about digital voice anyway? Well, DV is supposed to give a better audio quality at lower signal levels. DV can be routed over networks such as the internet to other repeaters on the other side of the world. Some limited computer data can be transmitted even when voice is being used at the same time. What makes DV good is not always the HT or the repeater, but more often what can happen in the networks behind the repeaters. Whether Fusion, D-Star or DMR, there exists virtual audio conference rooms where you can talk to multiple other people from around the world. Gathering places, if you like. D-Star call these reflectors, DMR call these talk groups, and Fusion actually calls them rooms. Which of the main three DV standards is the best? Answer: it depends. And the major thing it depends upon is what repeaters or other access points to digital voice systems you have in your area. D-Star used to have by far the largest coverage, but that is changing, and some areas have lots of DS and Fusion repeaters, while DMR repeaters in some areas are popping up like mushrooms. If you are in an area, as I am, in Germany, where DMR is becoming the major player as regards repeaters, it makes good sense to go with DMR. If you only have Fusion or D-Star digital repeaters in your area, you should look at whether you want to get equipment on those networks. I am glad to say that over the last 6 months, more and more gateways are being put in place between the networks, so someone accessing through a D-Star repeater can talk to a group on the DMR or Fusion network, and vice versa. The encoding of the digital voice and its transmission is totally different in these three systems. Hence it's unlikely that we will ever see simplex DV contacts between HTs on each of the DV standards. But if the HTs all switch back to analog FM, they can talk to each other. While person-to-person contacts through the D-Star network are possible, this is an area where DMR network doesn't lend itself at the moment. D-Star has been around longer, and features like Follow Me, where you can see the last repeater someone used, and automatic programming of repeaters into a HT from a central database are simply not yet available on the DMR network. OK, if you're still listening at this point, you haven't decided to go to YESO Fusion or D-Star and are still interested in DMR. So, what was that comment I made at the very beginning about my new HT being dual band and dual time slot? Well, dual band is clear, 2 meters and 77 bands. Dual time slot, that's an interesting concept. On an analog repeater, only one person can use it at a time. But on a DMR repeater, 2 people can use the same repeater at the same time and not hear the other person. This is done through an idea from computer networking, TDMA, or time division multiple access. A period of time is cut up into small pieces, and then the first, third, fifth, seventh, etc. piece is allocated to time slot number 1, and the second, fourth, sixth, eighth, and so on to time slot number 2. Although the repeater still only uses one input and output frequency, the digital tones that are the user's voices that have been converted into can contain 2 conversations happening at the same time. Sounds good, right? Well, yes, but who controls which time slot you decide to use? Well, there is a convention that says people wanting to talk locally on the repeater use time slot 2, while long distance and specialised groups use time slot 1. There is no time slot button on the HT to select the time slot you will use, rather it is programmed into the code plug. Hang on, there's another new term. Do I have to buy some special plugs and carry them around with me? Well, originally, when Motorola started DMR, there were indeed plugs with an EEPROM on them that would be plugged into the radio. But nowadays, code plug simply means the configuration file that is created on a PC and then transferred into the HT's memory, similar to what we are used to with FM handy talkies. A DMR HT that can choose between 2 time slot channels is referred to as a Tier 2 radio. There were radios that could only use one of the 2 time slot groups. Remember, DMR is aimed at commercial usage, and in some cases only one voice channel was needed. These radios are classified as Tier 1 radios. There were even some radios that transmitted on both time slot channels at the same time. Luckily, they have been either fixed or removed from the market now. For amateur radio usage, you need a Tier 2 radio. On the repeater side, Motorola started the standard with their TRBO turbo systems. These are managed in the main part using C-bridge units to connect internationally, and the infrastructure is managed by the DMR MARC group. Each region has a master and peer structure between the repeaters, with at least one master server. In Germany, that master server was DMR-DL, and each Motorola DMR repeater would connect to that to form part of the larger network. DMR-DL expanded over time and eventually also connected back to the DMR MARC network in the US. Then along came a Chinese company, Hytera, and their repeaters wouldn't talk to Motorola repeaters or the C-bridges, so a small Hytera network started in Germany. At this point, another group decided they needed to bridge the 2 networks, and this work was what was later to become DMR+. After a while, the people running the main server for DMR-DL network could not support it anymore for personal reasons, and slowly it appeared that DMR-DL would close. So, many of the Motorola servers that were attached to the DMR-DL, DMR Mark, master server in Germany, switched over to the DMR+ network, which by now could support both Motorola and Hytera repeaters through IPCS2 units. IPCS is IP Site Connection Server. DMR-DL did indeed close down for a while, however some others managed to get it going again. But by then, most of the DMR repeaters had switched to DMR+, or to the newer Brandmeister network. From an amateur point of view, the Motorola DMR Mark and Hytera DMR+ repeaters are similar. However, they both have their own independent back-end networks with their own talk group audio conference rooms. DMR+ is an amateur-only interface between networks supporting Motorola on one side and networks supporting Hytera on the other side, and grew to be able to support these plus the MVDVM and other hotspot units. Out of a UK-only Phoenix network, a new worldwide network called Brandmeister has appeared in the last couple of years. Both of these networks wanted a more open architecture, and the big change that the Brandmeister connected repeaters brought over the DMR Mark and DMR Plus connected ones was the fact that the user could choose which talk group they wanted to connect to from their radio, and the Brandmeister network would route them there. In the case of the earlier standards, the repeater owner sets up a list of talk groups that can be accessed via the time slot 1 channel and another list for time slot 2. In comparison to the number of possible talk groups on Brandmeister, these lists limit the number of talk groups that can be accessed from a DMR or DMR Plus repeater, but usually contain the most common regional and national talk groups. These different capabilities are on the repeater and network side. Nowadays, you don't need a different HT for each of the DMR standards. All current DMR HTs sold to the amateur market will work with all 3 DMR networks. I hope you are still with me, because this is where it starts to get complicated. Let's look at what has to be configured into that code plug configuration file for the particular HT you have. Although what has to be configured is the same across all radios, there is no standard format for the computer file, so you cannot take a code plug file from one make of HT and use it on a different make. Normally you can't use the same file between different models of one manufacturer. The HT programming program Chirp does not yet support DMR handy talkies. There are some websites that can generate code plugs, but only for certain models of certain manufacturers. And as yet, I have not found one for my Baofeng RD5R. Let's look at some terms. Channel. This is the record that contains the physical RF information. What frequency to receive on, what to transmit on, what power to run, in the case of channel records for analog repeaters, what CTCSS tone, or for digital repeaters, what colour code is needed. Straightforward enough, eh? Right, well for analog FM, yes, but for digital, this record acts as a link between other records or lists in the code plug as well. Going back to the point about talk groups, each talk group has an ID, a number in the system. All talk groups that you wish to be able to access need to be in the digital contacts list within your code plug. You have to create an entry through the configuration program known as CPS, Customer Programming Software, that has the number and a descriptive text. To be able to access one of these talk groups, you have to select it in the contacts field in the channel record that we just talked about. But that's not all. For security, there is another section in the CPS for receive list files. These are lists of talk groups that the user is allowed to access. So again, the digital contact that you just created also needs to be in the receive list entry in the code plug. The receive list name needs to be put in the channel records as well. Okay, so that's it, right? Wrong. We normally want to be able to scan across talk groups on different repeaters, so there are also scanning lists. These need to have channel records listed within them and are limited to 16 entries on the Baofeng, so you'll find that you will have several scanning lists. Remember that a channel record is needed for each talk group on each time slot for each server you wish to access, so it's not one record for one repeater, it can be several. The scan list also has to be added into the channel record. Okay, why don't we operate manually rather than scanning? Well, yes, you can do that through the menu on the HT and scroll on the LCD down to the channel that you want to access, but that can be an awful lot of records to scroll through. One solution is to group the channels into zones, and indeed, you could create zone lists within the CPS. Guess what? The name of the relevant zone list also goes into the digital channel record. All of these lists or groups are linked together through the channel record, and you will have a lot of channel records as you have one record per repeater, per time slot, per talk group, and they all need links defining in them. I think you'll understand why I felt like a dummy when I tried to get all of this working, but I did succeed and have documented everything at tinyurl.com/dd5lp-DMR. I've also put a couple of sample code plugs there, but these will only work with my model of the HT, the Baofeng RD5R. Good luck if you decide to try digital voice, whichever standard you choose. 73 from Ed, DD5LP.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, thank you, Ed, there, for your feature introducing DMR to us, and hopefully you guys got something from the feature there. And thank you again, Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, for producing that for us. Well, we wrap up now the show in the 73 section, and first off, I'd like to thank the guys that financially helped us out this episode. Stefan Latimer, 2E0 Victor Kilo Mike, and also Phil Heckingbottom, VK6 Alpha Delta Foxtrot. Guys, this proves it's not just financially you can help out the show, it's also with other ways you can help us out as well, you know, helping promote the show, telling your friends, getting links out there, etc., to the show as well. Everything you can help us out on certainly helps grow the show. And as we've always said, it's a show for amateurs by amateurs, so everything you can do to helping you find value and helping us out is always greatly appreciated. Now, Dad, your feature in the last episode on a good set of headphones received some feedback as well from Ken Miller, K6 Charlie Tango Whiskey. And he advises that the best he's ever used or owned are some headphones from Arlan Communications, where he uses the RS20S model. And he's also got a classic pair, the RS20CR which is a mono set of headphones. He's popped a link for that on the show notes there of a recommendation of a good set of headphones that he's used in the past. And Ken, we really do appreciate you getting in touch with us and letting us know about those headphones. I've not come across them, Dad. Is it a pair you've ever come across?
No, I haven't, Colin, but there's lots of different headphones out there, and thanks for your reply, Ken. Most appreciated. But what I said was there's lots of different headphones out there, and the important thing is to try them, make sure they're comfortable, make sure they work and do what you want. And if you're lucky enough to have another amateur near you who's able to let you have a trial of theirs, they might be the right ones. It really is a personal choice with headphones, in my opinion. And that's why I didn't say one set was better than another. Colin?
No, makes perfect sense, Well, as always, guys, we encourage you to keep in contact with us. And, of course, you can go to icqpodcast.com. And while there, obviously, check out the donation page and, keep the show advert free. We always appreciate that. The Facebook group, our Twitter handles, at M1MRB and at Colin Butler, are ways of keeping in touch with us, between the shows. And, the next weekend from this release date, the last weekend of May into the first weekend of June, is obviously Friedrich Schafer and Ham Radio 2018. And at the show will be Ed Durant, DD5 Lima Papa, Chris Howard, Mike Zero Tango Charlie Hotel, and myself, Colin M6BOY, along with my senior harmonic. We'll be at the show there. And if you see us in our orange t-shirts, feel free to come up and say hi. And we'd always greatly appreciate, meeting anyone at the show who's a listener. So it'd be great to see you there. Check out the YouTube videos that we do as well. We've obviously famously got the stuff last year from G8 BBC, but also previous years' visits to Friedrich Schafer. And we'll try and get some more videos up after the show as well. So that's at youtube.com/ICQ podcast. You can check those things out there. And again, thanks again to Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, for helping us out there with our feature in this episode. And also thanks as well to the guys on the News Roundtable, Leslie, Golf Zero, Charlie, India, Bravo, Edmund, Mike Zero, Mike November Golf, and Bill, November 3, Juliet, India, X-Ray. Thank you very much, guys, for taking part there with the show there. Well, I think all that's left to do now, Dad, is to make Mum a cup of tea, and hopefully, if she hasn't eaten all Phil's biscuits, get her a chocolate biscuit out of one of Phil's stashes.
Yeah. Well, those who didn't know, we will find her a chocolate biscuit because Phil Higginbottom brought us over some chocolate biscuits from Australia all the way, and he bought a couple of stubbies over, which I never knew what a stubby was until Phil put them in my hand. But a stubby is like a can holder, Coke can holder. Keeps the drink cold and your hand warm so you're not frozen there against the cold tin. And your mum's thoroughly impressed with Phil. So, Phil, thank you very much. I did thank you on the Belfast for them. But Mrs. Butler's enjoying your chocolate biscuits. She's taking them sparingly, but she is enjoying them. And we'll find her one tonight. And thank you very much for the stubbies, Phil. She likes her stubby as well. So I'm going to go and make Mrs. Butler a nice cup of tea. And we've certainly got a chocolate biscuit for her, Colin.
Perfect. Well, look, guys, we're doing this all again in a fortnight's time. We'll see you then. 73.
Yeah, 73.